Welcome to the Facilitators Deep Dive Podcast, your podcast on your way to facilitation mastery.
Welcome to a deep dive into Brené Brown's Dare to Lead.
Yeah.
We've got a fascinating mix of sources today.
Oh, yeah, we do.
Interviews with global C-level leaders, personal anecdotes, and even insights from Star Wars and Harry Potter.
You'll be surprised by just how many unexpected places she finds inspiration.
So your source material, it's packed with research.
Yes.
Real-world stories about what it takes to be a daring leader.
It really is.
We're going to extract the key takeaways.
That's right.
Practical, no BS.
Yep.
Actionable insights that you can use to become a braver and more effective leader.
We'll give you a solid understanding of the core concepts, but also how they play out in real life so you can start applying them right away.
The journey to daring leadership starts with understanding vulnerability.
That's right.
Brené Brown has this great anecdote about accidentally attending a C-level conference.
Yeah.
She thought C-level meant C-level folks, down to earth, salt of the earth types.
It turns out it was a room full of CEOs.
Can you imagine?
I know this story isn't just funny, though.
Right.
It highlights a fear that many leaders, even at the highest level, struggle with.
What's that?
The fear of not being enough. It's a perfect example of how vulnerability and the fear it triggers can show up in unexpected places.
It's that feeling of, oh crap, I'm in over my head.
Yeah, exactly.
But Brown doesn't shy away from that feeling.
Nope.
She actually embraces it.
She does, and that's a key part of her message.
Okay.
We can't be courageous leaders if we're constantly trying to hide our imperfections and fears.
She debunks 6 common myths surrounding vulnerability.
Yeah.
The first one being vulnerability is weakness.
Right.
I think we've all fallen into that trap at some point.
It's a myth that's deeply ingrained in many cultures, especially workplace cultures. But Brown tackles this head-on with a powerful question that she asks military special forces.
Military special forces.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
I know.
What does she ask them?
She simply asks, can you give me an example of courage without vulnerability? And nobody, not even highly trained soldiers, has ever been able to give her a good answer.
I hadn't considered that before.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder if maybe vulnerability is actually the key to being strong, especially as a leader.
That's precisely what Brown's research shows. Courage requires vulnerability. We can't be brave without being willing to be seen, imperfections and all.
Think about a time you felt uncertain at work.
Okay.
How could you have approached that situation with more vulnerability?
Right.
What would have been the potential benefits?
Another myth is, I don't do vulnerability.
I think I've said that myself a few times.
Probably. But Brown points out that vulnerability is unavoidable.
Okay.
We experience uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure in all aspects of life.
Yeah.
It's not a question of if we'll be vulnerable,
Right.
but how we'll deal with it.
So we can either try to ignore vulnerability or choose to own it, understand it, and work with it.
Exactly. Choosing to ignore vulnerability ultimately gives it more power over us.
Okay.
It'll still show up in our lives, but in potentially destructive ways like burnout or unhealthy coping mechanisms.
So how do we move from letting vulnerability do us to doing vulnerability?
Doing vulnerability means being conscious of it,
Well,
learning to navigate the discomfort, and staying true to our values even when we feel exposed. It's a skill and it takes practice,
okay.
but the rewards are immense.
Brown also talks about the paradox of vulnerability. It's both the birthplace of the positive emotions we crave and a source of risk and discomfort.
Yes.
How do we make sense of that?
It's like wanting to bake a cake but being afraid to crack the eggs.
Okay.
You can't have the sweetness without the mess.
I see.
We can't experience love, belonging, joy, or creativity without opening ourselves up to the possibility of pain and disappointment.
Right.
It's not a one-way street.
We can't selectively numb the negative emotions without numbing the positive ones, too.
That's right.
They're all part of the experience.
Vulnerability is a package deal. We have to be all in if we want the good stuff. And that takes courage.
Which is why Brené Brown spends so much time talking about building what she calls grounded confidence.
Yes.
What exactly is grounded confidence?
Grounded confidence is the opposite of fake it till you make it.
Okay.
It's about developing a deep understanding of our strengths and our weaknesses and being willing to show up authentically even when we feel uncertain.
So it's not about pretending to have all the answers.
No.
It's about being comfortable with not knowing everything and being open to learning and growing.
Exactly. Grounded confidence is a much more solid foundation.
Okay.
Because it allows us to learn from our mistakes,
Yeah.
to take risks, and to keep growing.
Brown uses the example of athletes who spend countless hours practicing fundamental skills so that when the pressure is on, they can execute with confidence.
Think about a basketball player practicing free throws.
Okay.
They don't just show up on game day and hope for the best.
Right.
They put in the time, they develop the muscle memory so that when the pressure is on, they can execute.
Yeah.
It's not about being perfect every time.
Right.
It's about having the tools and the practice to handle those moments when things get tough.
She also talks about the importance of curiosity as a key ingredient for grounded confidence.
Yes.
I like that.
Curiosity is an act of courage because it requires us to admit that we don't know everything, to ask questions and to be open to new perspectives.
It helps us step outside of our comfort zones, which is where the learning and growth happen.
Exactly. Curiosity fuels learning, creativity, and problem solving.
Yeah.
It allows us to stay flexible, to adapt to change, and to constantly expand our knowledge and skills.
Now that we understand the importance of vulnerability and empathy,
Right.
let's explore how these concepts connect to building trust.
Okay.
Brown says that, contrary to popular belief, trust actually doesn't come before vulnerability.
Interesting.
What does she mean?
It's a common misconception that we need to establish trust first. Then we can be vulnerable.
Right.
But Brown argues it's actually the other way around.
Okay.
We build trust through vulnerability.
Okay. That seems a little counterintuitive.
I know.
How does that work?
Brown uses a great analogy about marble jars.
Okay.
We earn marbles or trust from others in small moments through consistent behavior,
Like what?
being reliable,
Okay.
respecting boundaries, showing integrity.
Yeah.
And the way we demonstrate those qualities is by taking the risk of being vulnerable ourselves.
We're putting ourselves out there,
Yeah.
showing people who we really are, what we stand for,
Yes.
what matters to us.
Right.
And if they respond in kind, the trust builds.
Exactly.
It makes sense when you think about it that way.
It's a two-way street.
Yeah.
We have to be willing to go first to take the risk of being seen.
Right.
And when we do that, we create the space for others to do the same.
Brown provides a framework for understanding trust called the Braving Inventory.
Braving stands for boundaries, reliability, accountability, vault integrity, non-judgment, and generosity.
Wow, that's a lot.
I know, right?
It's helpful to think of each element as a building block of trust.
Okay.
Boundaries are about setting limits and respecting others' limits.
Right.
Reliability means doing what you say you'll do.
Right.
Accountability is about owning your mistakes and making amends.
So it's not about being perfect,
Right.
but about being responsible for our actions.
The vault is about keeping confidences.
Yes.
And not sharing information that's not ours to share. Integrity is about choosing courage over comfort.
Yeah.
And doing what's right, even when it's hard.
That's it.
Non-judgment means that we can ask for what we need without judging ourselves, and we can offer support to others without judging them.
Right.
And finally, generosity is about assuming the best in others and extending the benefit of the doubt.
Yoo-hoo.
This inventory really breaks down the specific behaviors that build trust.
It does.
But where do we even begin?
It all starts with self-trust.
Okay.
We need to be able to rely on ourselves, hold ourselves accountable, and respect our own boundaries before we can expect others to do the same.
Right.
Think about the braving elements.
Okay.
How strong is your self-trust in each area? Where could you improve?
Let's shift gears a bit and talk about empathy.
Okay.
One of Brown's most moving stories about empathy is about the time she missed her daughter's senior night field hockey game because of a canceled flight.
This story beautifully illustrates what true empathy looks like in action.
Yeah.
Brown's colleague Suzanne, instead of trying to minimize her pain, acknowledges and validates her feelings.
I remember that part. Suzanne doesn't try to fix the situation or offer empty platitudes.
No.
She simply says, I know what a big deal this is for you. This just sucks. My heart is breaking too.
Right. And that is so powerful because in that moment, Suzanne creates a real connection. She doesn't shy away from the rawness of the situation.
Yeah.
She allows space for Brown's grief and disappointment. It's a powerful reminder that sometimes the best way to support someone is to be present with them in their pain without judgment or the need to fix things.
Which brings us to an important distinction that Brown makes.
Okay.
Empathy versus sympathy.
Yeah.
Empathy is feeling with people, while sympathy is feeling for them.
While sympathy can come from a good place, it can also create distance.
Oh.
It's like looking down on someone from above rather than getting in the well with them.
Empathy fuels connection.
Yes.
Whereas sympathy can lead to disconnection.
Right.
Because we're not meeting the person where they are.
Right.
We're imposing our own perspective, our own need to fix things,
Right.
rather than truly listening and acknowledging their experience.
That's such an important point. And Brown actually identifies 6 common empathy misses.
What are those?
Things we do that, while well-intentioned, can shut down connection.
Can you give us an example?
Sure, one common empathy miss is offering unsolicited advice or trying to silver lining the situation.
Like what?
For example, saying something like, well, at least you're healthy to someone who's just lost their job.
Right.
Or comparing someone's experience to your own in a way that diminishes their feelings.
Yeah.
Like saying, oh, I know exactly how you feel. I had a similar experience. And then launching into your own story.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
I know I've been guilty of that myself sometimes.
Me too.
It seems like a common thread with these empathy misses is that they're often driven by our own discomfort with vulnerability. We're so quick to try to fix things to make the other person feel better
Right.
that we miss the opportunity to be present with them in their pain.
You hit the nail on the head. Our discomfort with vulnerability often leads us to try to control the situation rather than hold space for the other person's emotions.
So how do we get better at empathy? Is there a magic formula?
It's not magic, but it does take practice.
Okay.
One of the most important things is to cultivate mindfulness,
Okay.
to pay attention to what's happening in the conversation, to the other person's body language,
Yeah.
and to our own emotional responses.
So we need to be aware of what's happening within ourselves so we can respond in a way that's truly helpful,
Yes.
rather than reacting from our own discomfort.
Exactly. And remember that we'll make mistakes.
Right.
We won't always get it right,
Yeah.
but that's part of the learning process.
Okay.
The more we practice, the better we'll become at recognizing those moments when we're missing the mark and course correcting.
So empathy is a journey, not a destination.
That's a great way to put it.
It's an ongoing process of learning, growing, and getting more comfortable with our own vulnerability and the vulnerability of others.
Well said.
This is a great place to pause for now.
Oh, okay.
In the next part of our deep dive into Dare to Lead, we'll explore Brown's framework for navigating setbacks, the art of rising, and how to cultivate a culture of courage and empathy in our teams.
Sounds good. We were talking about empathy and how it's really about connection, meeting people where they are.
And that connection plays a huge role in how we navigate those inevitable setbacks and failures.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It all ties into Brené Brown's framework for navigating those moments, which she calls the art of rising.
It sounds almost like a martial arts technique.
In a way, it is. It's a 3-part process: the reckoning, the rumble, and the revolution.
Okay.
It's about having a plan for getting back up, learning from our mistakes, and coming out stronger and more resilient.
So it's not about avoiding failure altogether, but learning how to deal with it effectively.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Brown emphasizes the importance of recognizing what she calls our shitty first drafts, those stories we make up in the absence of data.
Oh, I know those stories all too well.
We all do. It's a very human thing. When something bad happens, our brains try to make sense of it,
Yeah.
to come up with an explanation.
Right.
And often that explanation involves blaming ourselves or others, making assumptions and jumping to conclusions.
Like our minds go into overdrive trying to protect us from further hurt.
That's a great way to put it. Think about a recent setback you experienced. What was your initial story? What evidence did you have to support it?
Now that you mention it, my initial story was way more dramatic than what actually happened.
That's the thing about SFDs. They're often based on our fears and insecurities, not on facts. Brown encourages us to get curious about those stories.
Okay.
Where is this story coming from?
Okay.
What am I making up? What evidence do I have to support this?
So it's about taking a step back and questioning those initial knee-jerk reactions.
Precisely. And once we start to examine those stories, we often realize they're not serving us.
Right.
We can then start to rewrite the narrative and create a more empowering story.
That's where the rumble comes in, right?
Yes, the rumble is about getting in the ring with those difficult emotions,
Yeah.
those SFDs, and really wrestling with them.
So it's not about ignoring those feelings or trying to sweep them under the rug.
Not at all.
Yeah.
Brown emphasizes the importance of not offloading those emotions onto others.
What does she mean?
We can't blame shame or numb our way out of those tough spots.
We have to own our experiences, feel our feelings, and process them in a healthy way. I'm starting to see how all of this ties back to vulnerability.
Exactly. It's about being willing to be uncomfortable, to sit with those difficult emotions and to work through them.
But we don't have to do it alone, right?
Absolutely. Not having a supportive community, friends, family, colleagues can make a huge difference.
It's like having a team of spotters in the gym helping us lift those heavy emotional weights.
I love that analogy. And that brings us to the revolution. the final stage of the art of rising.
What happens in the revolution?
It's about taking what we've learned from the rumble, from those difficult experiences, and using it to make changes in our lives, to grow and to become more courageous.
Okay.
We turn those setbacks into opportunities for transformation.
So it's not just about surviving those tough times, it's about using them to propel us forward.
Exactly. And this is where we start to see the real power of Brown's work.
Okay.
It's not about feeling good or avoiding discomfort.
Right.
It's about developing the skills and resilience to show up in the world in a more authentic, courageous, and compassionate way.
And that benefits not just us as individuals,
No.
but our teams, our organizations, and our communities. Speaking of making mistakes, Brown tells a funny story about what she calls the ham foldover debacle.
That's a classic Brené Brown story. She completely misinterprets her husband's simple statement, "I am so hungry,"
Oh, yeah.
and makes up this whole story about how he's disappointed in her and how she's failing as a wife and mother.
It turns out he just wanted a ham sandwich.
I know it happens to the best of us.
It does. It's a great reminder that our brains are wired to make up stories, and sometimes those stories are way off base.
Especially when we're stressed or feeling vulnerable.
Right. So how do we avoid falling into those SFD traps?
Brown emphasizes paying attention to our bodies, those physical sensations that tell us we're hooked by emotion.
Okay.
Our bodies are incredibly wise.
Yeah.
And they give us signals when we're feeling stressed, overwhelmed, or triggered.
So we need to learn to listen to those signals and pause before reacting.
It's exactly. Brown also highlights 6 common offloading strategies that we use to get rid of those uncomfortable emotions, often at the expense of others.
What are some examples of those offloading strategies?
Things like chandeliering, where we explode at someone unexpectedly,
Oh, yeah.
or numbing, where we use substances or behaviors to avoid feeling our feelings. These are all ways of trying to protect ourselves from vulnerability.
But ultimately, they don't work. They just create more distance and more problems.
You're absolutely right. The only way to truly deal with those difficult emotions is to go through them, not around them. That's what the rumble's all about.
And the more we rumble, the better we get at it.
Exactly. It's a skill that takes practice. The more we do it, the better and faster we get at recognizing our SFDs, challenging them, and creating new, more empowering narratives.
That makes me think about those difficult conversations we were discussing earlier, those rumbles with other people, where we need to address conflict or give feedback.
Those conversations can be challenging, but Brown provides some helpful tips for approaching them in a way that's more likely to lead to positive outcomes.
Like what?
Like setting the stage for the conversation, creating a safe container where both parties feel seen and heard.
Right.
And one of the keys to that is what she calls permission slips.
Permission slips. What are those?
It's about acknowledging up front that it's okay to have different perspectives, to feel a range of emotions, and to even disagree without jeopardizing the relationship.
Okay.
We're taking the pressure off and creating a space where people can be authentic and vulnerable without fear of judgment.
So we're setting the expectation that it's okay to not be okay, to not have all the answers, and to be on a journey of learning and growth together.
Exactly. And this allows for more honest and productive communication.
Okay.
We're less likely to get defensive or shut down if we feel like our feelings are valid and respected.
It seems like one of Brown's core messages is that we need to normalize those difficult conversations.
Yeah.
Those moments of discomfort rather than trying to avoid them.
Absolutely. It ties back to her emphasis on courage and vulnerability. We can't have real connection, real trust, or real growth without being willing to lean into those moments of discomfort.
That's a powerful message.
It is, and it requires us to shift our mindset from "I'm right, you're wrong" to "let's understand each other's perspectives."
It's about approaching the conversation with a genuine desire to learn and connect.
Well said. Brown provides some practical tips for giving and receiving feedback as well.
I'm all ears.
One that stands out is focusing on behaviors, not personalities. It's about being specific about what we observe and how it impacts us,
Okay.
rather than making sweeping generalizations or attacking the person's character.
So instead of saying you're always so rude and disrespectful,
Right.
we could say something like, I noticed that you interrupted me several times in the meeting.
Exactly. The first statement is a personal attack that's likely to trigger defensiveness. The second statement focuses on a specific behavior that can be addressed. Brown also encourages us to give feedback from a place of curiosity, not judgment.
That sounds a lot like what we were talking about with empathy.
It is. It's about asking questions like, "What's going on for you?" or "What do you need from me?"
It seems like so much of Brown's work boils down to creating that culture of connection and belonging both in our personal lives and in our workplaces.
You're absolutely right. It's about fostering an environment where people feel safe to be themselves, to take risks, to speak up, to disagree, and to make mistakes without fear of shame or humiliation.
And a lot of that starts with leadership, right?
Yes.
Leaders setting the tone for the organization.
Absolutely. People
Uh,
take their cues from the top. If leaders are willing to be vulnerable, admit mistakes, and ask for help, it creates a ripple effect throughout the organization.
It's like they're giving everyone permission to be human.
Exactly. It sends a powerful message that it's okay to not have all the answers and to be on a journey of learning and growth together. That kind of environment is so essential for creativity, innovation, and collaboration. When people feel safe, they're more likely to share ideas, speak up, and challenge the status quo.
Brown shares some inspiring stories about leaders who are doing this work, who are creating those cultures of courage and empathy in their organizations.
One fantastic example is Natalie Duman, who transformed the performance management process at her company Myovision. Instead of relying on those traditional, often dreaded performance reviews, they created a system where feedback is ongoing, transparent, and driven by the employees themselves.
It sounds like they flipped the script on performance management.
They did, and the results speak for themselves. Increased engagement, trust, and a growth mindset among the team. It's a great example of how we can create a more positive and empowering work environment.
It's a reminder that these concepts aren't just theoretical, they can be put into practice in very real and impactful ways.
Exactly, and that brings us back to you as you consider your own leadership journey, your own team dynamics, and your own approach to vulnerability and trust what stands out.
That's a great question. One thing that really sticks with me is the idea of grounded confidence. It's not about being perfect or having all the answers. It's about being comfortable with who you are, strengths and weaknesses included, and being open to learning and growing. It's something I can definitely work on.
That's a great insight. What else stands out?
The importance of empathy really hit home for me. I know I've been guilty of those empathy misses in the past, so I want to be more mindful of how I show up for others, especially when they're struggling.
I think we can all relate to that. It's a journey and we're all learning as we go, but the more we practice empathy, the better we get at it.
Let's take a quick break and come back to wrap up our deep dive into Dare to Lead. We were just talking about the power of empathy and the importance of creating a culture of connection and belonging.
And how so much of that starts with leadership.
Leaders setting the tone for vulnerability, openness, and trust.
It's about modeling those behaviors, showing that it's okay to be human, to make mistakes, and to be on a journey of learning and growth together.
One of the things that struck me about Brené Brown's work is that she doesn't shy away from tough topics like those difficult conversations we sometimes need to have,
Oh, yeah.
whether it's addressing conflict or giving feedback.
Those conversations can be really challenging. But Brown offers some great tips for approaching them in a way that's more likely to lead to positive outcomes. Remember those permission slips we talked about?
Yes, giving ourselves and the other person permission to have different perspectives and feel a range of emotions without judgment.
It's about creating that safe space where people can be authentic and vulnerable.
So starting those tough conversations from a place of understanding rather than blame.
Exactly. And one of the key things Brown emphasizes is focusing on behaviors, not personalities.
Okay.
Being specific about what we observe and how it impacts us, rather than making sweeping generalizations or attacking someone's character.
It reminds me of something my therapist once said.
Oh, yeah.
Feelings are always valid,
Uh-huh.
but behaviors are not.
That's a great way to put it. It's not about denying our feelings or the other person's feelings.
Right.
It's about finding a constructive way to address the behavior that's causing a problem.
So instead of saying, you're always so negative, we could say, I noticed that you've made several critical comments in the meeting today. I'm wondering what's going on.
That's a great example. You're acknowledging the behavior without making it a personal attack. You're also coming from a place of curiosity, which can be really disarming.
It's like you're inviting the other person into a dialogue rather than a battle.
Exactly. And that's so important for building trust and connection. Brown also talks about the importance of giving feedback from a place of generosity, assuming the best in the other person.
I think that can be really hard sometimes, especially when we're feeling hurt or frustrated.
It is hard, but it's worth striving for. It's about remembering that the other person is probably not trying to hurt us intentionally.
Right.
They may be unaware of the impact of their behavior.
Or they may be struggling with something that we don't know about.
That's right. And by coming from a place of generosity, We're more likely to open up a dialogue where we can understand each other's perspectives and find a solution that works for everyone.
It seems like so much of Brown's work is about shifting our mindset, about challenging those old ways of thinking that can keep us stuck in fear, shame, and scarcity.
I completely agree. It's about embracing a more courageous and compassionate way of being in the world.
A way of being that allows us to show up more fully, both for ourselves and for others.
Yes, and that's what daring leadership is all about.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into Dare to Lead, what's one final thought you'd like to leave our listener with?
I would encourage you to keep asking yourself, what would it look like to lead with more courage and empathy in my own life?
Yeah.
It's a journey, not a destination we're all going to stumble and fall along the way. But the important thing is to keep getting back up, keep learning, and keep practicing those skills of vulnerability, connection, and courage.
Those are wise words. Daring leadership is not about perfection. It's about showing up authentically, embracing vulnerability, and leading with heart.
Beautifully said. Remember, you've got this.
And that's a wrap on our deep dive into Brené Brown's Dare to Lead. We hope you've gained some valuable insights and are feeling inspired to step into your own daring leadership journey. Keep learning, keep growing, and keep leading with heart.
See you next time on the Facilitators Deep Dive Podcast, your podcast on your way to facilitation mastery. Until next time.
See you then.